Vampires. They suck on your blood. They fly. They turn into bats. They don't have any reflections. How could you make them worse? Well, what if the vampire was Batman? And Superman. Today we are looking at DC versus vampires. So this is the story I picked for this spooky story or scary story spectacular. It's a modern trope of vampires, but in the DC universe. So definitely a twist. Because can you imagine the vampires with superpowers? How would they act? What would they look like? What would they do? Let's find out. You're going to read the first chapter with me, and then we're going to see how vampires can be really scary. Alright guys, so let's take a look at DC versus vampires. Now I picked this one because, of course, vampires is one of the ultimate tropes for Halloween in this scary season. You know, the idea of somebody sucking your blood and making you a slave or just killing you with their fangs and all that stuff. And then, of course, you throw it into the DC universe. Oh my gosh, of course I'm going to pick one of these for the Scary Story Spectacular. Now this is of course an Elseworld story, so Elseworld stories are stuff like Injustice or The Deceased or basically any DC story that's not in the main universe, that's not canon for the actual timeline or stories from the DC universe. That's called Elseworld stories, and this one is definitely an Elseworld story, and I really enjoyed it. JP has already done our first look at these, so check that out. But I'm going to show you the first chapter. We're going to read it together in our Scary Story Spectacular. Alright. So basically, we start off with this vampire. This stranger walking in the sunlight. He's heading towards the Hall of Justice. But there's somebody after him. And so he's running. He's trying to get to the Hall of Justice. But as you can see, he falls down. And then in the sun, he starts to burn. And oh my gosh, but who shows up? Why, it's Green Lantern. Hal Jordan here to save the day. And so he goes and helps this vampire come in. He takes him into the Hall of Justice. And this vampire is like, I need help from the Justice League because there's something going on with the vampires. And he kind of gives the backstory of the vampires. There's a Mary Queen of Blood. She was basically the vampire elder, and she was in charge of all of the vampires in the DC universe at that time, well, you know, in this world. And she's like, well, she was murdered. And, whoever murdered her, she was basically holding back from the vampires taking over and killing all the humans because she didn't want to upset the balance of things. But basically she was killed so that the humans could go ahead and then be food for all the vampires. So he was a vampire who was loyal to her, who also supported the balance between, humans and vampires. And he started hunting her killer. And he went and he found, that it led him to the Legion of Doom. And then, so when he went in there, he found that the Legion of Doom had either been killed or turned into vampires. And you see, like, for example, Solomon Grundy. You see, Sinestro here, Black Manta. All of these characters had been killed. And then you see that there was a plan from whoever killed Mary, the Queen of Blood, to put a giant solar shield to block the sun from hitting the earth so that the vampires could rule during day and night. And then they had their, he was like, they either had their targets or perhaps allies. So you see, like, it says Superman, Shazam, John Constantine, Satana to help do that. And then while he's there, it looks like Lex Luthor's still alive, and he's like, we need to stop this, and you need to take this to stop them, but I'm going to die. And he gives this note. Of course, he writes down this note, and he gives him a vial of blood, of his own blood. And so the vampire has to leave because he's being hunted by the other, I guess, like, for example, Scarecrow and Gorilla Grodd have been turned into vampires. So they go and they're hunting him down. As you see, the Riddler here is now a vampire as well. But he stabs him with the vial that Lex Luthor had given him, and it killed him. So it's like, okay, so this is gonna kill him. So he finally like leaves the Legion of Doom and he heads straight to the Hall of Justice to get the Justice League's help. And then he's like, this is why I'm here. I need to get them. Hal Jordan had told him, oh, they're all away on a space mission, so I'm the only one left. Him and this guy. And when this guy comes in, he's like, I'll get the rest of them. And he's like, they're here? So he's like, oh, I wish you hadn't had said that, Green Lantern said. And it turns out that he's a vampire. And so he grabs, he's from the Legion of Superheroes in the future. I forgot what his name is. But basically, the Green Lantern makes a giant blender with his ring and smoothies him to death, basically. Blah. And then you see the Green Lantern drinking it. And he's like, how can you go out into the sun? And he's like, basically, my power ring, since it's based off of light, I can wrap it around me to protect me from the ultraviolet rays, which is what kills the vampires. But I can also project it, so he basically was projecting it onto the vampire. So then, he burns him, he kills him, and he calls somebody, and he says, I guess he has a master. And he's like, yes, he was getting to the Justice League, but I don't know who else he might have gotten to. And then you see Aquaman come over here, and he's like, hey, have you seen Queen? I guess that's the name. His name is Queen. I don't know why. Where he is, and he's like, oh, I don't know. So basically, the Green Lantern has already been taken to be a vampire. And then, you see this, and he's like, we don't know who he might have spoken with, so we need to find that out. And then you see that in the Batcave that night, Batman gets a note. And there's Alfred. Now, the art style on this is amazing. I love this Bruce Wayne. He looks really good. So, shout out to the artist for this. I'll let you know who it is. But he's like, oh, you left a note by a bandaged man dressed up like a mummy. And he's like, this person knew you were Batman because he came to the manor, Bruce Wayne's manor, but he said, this is for Batman. And he's like, he knows who you were. And the note says, I know my coming here like this is dangerous, and I apologize, but I have nowhere else to go. I need your help. The world needs your help. We have met before, and I hope you might remember me. My name is Andrew Bennett, and I come to you now in the most desperate hour. My journey here has not been easy. I have been forced to run, to hide, to fight, but now I fear it all comes to an end one way or another. I am alone. I am afraid. I, vampire, am being hunted. I don't know exactly who they are. They could be anyone. They draw closer with every passing day. And then he also wanted, and then Alfred's like, he also wanted to let you know that Lex Luthor might have just saved the world, and he has that vial. So basically, he took Andrew Bennett, the vampire, took a contingency plan, and he gave them this stuff to send this to Batman before he went to the Hall of Justice, because he knew Batman was a detective. So I really like that premise, that he knows that Batman would be the one to be able to solve this. Will that work? That's really interesting. Will it work? That's something that you have to find out. So that is the end of chapter 1. And then after that, of course, continues into that. So I'm not going to spoil it for you two guys. It's really fun. This one is a really fun ride. If you haven't read this one, again, you don't know who's going to be a vampire, who's not. I would never expect Hal Jordan, but it actually makes a lot of sense, especially with the Ring of Power, because he can block the sun from himself. Interesting. So they definitely took a lot of liberties with this, but I like it because it's kind of like what would happen if vampires started taking over the heroes. So we see that a lot with the characters in here later on, who you would never suspect how they turn some people and how they are able to hide that. So it's really interesting. I always like these stories. One of my favorite stories of all time is the Batman versus Predator, which is completely out there. But these Elseworld stories are just kind of like DC's response to what if kind of stories, and I love them because it's just like like I said, what if vampires took over the DC universe? How would they handle that? And I really like the aspect of Batman being a key player, and just because my boy Batman. So I definitely picked this one for the Spooky Story Spectacular, just because again, vampires are classic Halloween and horror characters, and then throwing them in with the DC universe is great. I love that. I had the option of doing the Deceased 2, the zombie one, or the Marvel zombies, which are both great, but I like the vampire one just because sometimes zombies or kind of mindless vampires are actually in control and they have powers. So seeing that narrative take place of like, you have smart enemies now who can, hide in the shadows, they can turn into bats, they drink blood, they can turn on other people into minions. So that's always been really cool. And you have Batman, who would make the ultimate vampire, I would say. So that's really cool, guys. If you want to learn more about that, I would definitely say pick this up at Organic Price Books. The artwork is amazing. James Tynion is a great writer. I love his stuff. A lot of these stories actually are James Tynion has been writers for them. In Razor Blades, he's in that as well. And some other books that we have, James Tynion does a really good job. I think he also did Injustice and Deceased, if I'm not mistaken. But if I am, let me know. But there you go, guys. That's the first chapter. Get DC versus Vampires at Organic Price Books, and I will see you in the next one. Oh.